So, if you're jumping right into Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and you haven't gone with us this far, there's quite a bit there that, if we don't understand, we might be confused. The writer of Ecclesiastes is somebody who addresses an assembly, right? The word ecclesia is in the title, and the person who addresses an assembly is Ecclesiastes, the teacher or the preacher, as some might call him. And he's trying to find meaning in life under the sun. And under the sun is the perspective in which he's trying to view life, right? It's a humanistic, physical perspective on life, trying to find value and meaning in just the physical things of life. But the problem with that, of course, is you eventually have to go over the hill, right? You eventually, every breath, you're running out of them. It's like a tick of a clock that keeps counting down the moments of your life, giving it an expiration date, saying that eventually it's appointed to man to die once, and then after that to face judgment. And so we're kind of stuck in this idea of how do we find something of value, meaning in life, right? That's what we all want. We want to have a meaningful life. How do you find meaning in life if all you consider is what is beneath the sun, what is physical? And so far we found that there's nothing transcending. There's nothing that you might say is above the sun, until we started chapter 5, and then he began to say there was something good, that you must consider your steps before you walk into the house of God, because God is dangerously holy, right? And we need to make sure that when we approach God, we give him the reverence that he deserves. And I was thinking about that this week, and just a couple summers ago for our anniversary, me and my wife went to the Grand Canyon. And that is something that you want to consider your steps. It's incredibly beautiful, but it's dangerously holy, right? Dangerously beautiful. You don't want to get too close to that, the edge of it, right? And that's not because it's bad. It's because it's powerful. It's scary, right? That's what God is like. He's good. He's beautiful. He's amazing. But he needs to be approached with respect because God is dangerously holy. And so the writer of Ecclesiastes tells us that we should guard our steps. Go near the house of the Lord, or go into the house of the Lord to listen rather than speak. And then when you do speak, consider your words carefully, because God is in heaven and you are on earth. And so let your words be few. But eventually, you have to leave God's house. You have to go out into the world, and you guys all have to do that tonight. You leave the church and you go out into the world, and when you step foot out into the world, what do you find? Problems, struggles, justice denied, all the areas of life that we're saying this is not fair. It's a physical perspective, and when you look at the world, it just doesn't seem fair. And so look with me at Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 8. Now, remember, he's just stepped out of God's house, and he says, if you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised by such things, for the official is eyed by the higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all, and the king profits from the fields. That's what he's saying. He's saying, when you step out into the world and you see wickedness, don't be surprised by it. Don't even be like, like the writer of Ecclesiastes says, he saw the tears of those who are oppressed. You might be heartbroken over it, but certainly don't be surprised by it, because this is what life is like under the sun. In a world that's been frustrated by sin, right? In a world that's been subjected by the one who has subjected it, so in hopes that there might be redemption in the future, God has frustrated the world by sin, and so we walk out into it, and we see things that cause us to maybe distress. Some people will look at justice and rights denied, and they'll think, well, God, how could you allow such things to happen? And if there was a good God, why does God allow bad things to happen, right? And that's kind of some of the questions that we might hear if we only consider a perspective that is under the sun. But you notice in Ecclesiastes, it's not God who's causing the oppression. It's the officials, right? Do not be surprised by such things, because for the official is eyed by one higher, and over them both are higher still. And above all of them, at the very top of the ladder, that's the king. right? I mean, oppression, injustice, hardships happen in our world because it spreads through the structures like cancer through the body. We shouldn't be surprised by it. God doesn't cause it. In fact, the very fact that we can look at that and say that it is objectively wrong is evidence that there's a God who has an objective standard. And so don't be surprised by it. See, the king is over it all, but I want you to remember that God is supposed to be king, is he not? Like in Leviticus chapter 23, Leviticus 25, verse 23, it says this: the land must not be sold permanently because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as a foreigner and strangers. See, from the very beginning, God said that the land is his. He's supposed to be king. So if you look out in the world and you see oppression, remember it's because people rejected God as their king. Right? The land is meant to be his, but instead, the people rejected God. It's by the time we get to the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel, that we start to see people rejecting God as king and the effects of that. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 7, what's happening here is all the people are coming to Samuel saying, we want a God like all the other nations. We don't want to have Yahweh as our God. We don't want to have God as our king. We want to have a king like the rest of the nations. And in verse 7, God tells Samuel this, and the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Right? What happens when people reject God as their king? Evil and wickedness happen in the world. And Samuel warned the people of this. He said, if you're going to pick a different king, these are going to be the kind of things that happen to you. So read with me in verse 11 what Samuel warns will happen if they have any other king. He said this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers, and he will take the best of your fields and vineyards and the olive groves and will give them to his attendants. See, Samuel warned them that if they wanted to choose a different king besides the Lord, this was going to be the effect. And so when Solomon writes the book of Ecclesiastes, he says, don't be surprised when you see injustice happening in your world. When you see oppression happening in your world, don't be surprised by it. This is the effect of a people who choose something else to be their Lord, to be their king. It's not God who causes the oppression. It's not him that advocates for injustice. When people refuse to make God Lord, this is the result. And go out into the world and you'll see the results of that, won't you? Don't be surprised at all by it. It's a structure that goes from official to official, and the king is over it all. So don't be surprised when you see the poor oppressed. But here's the question. How are you supposed to live? How are you supposed to exist in a world where there's so many tragedies, so many hardships, so much injustice? How are you supposed to live? And maybe more than that, how are you supposed to find joy? Well, we know because we have a New Testament perspective, we have a kingdom perspective. We know that joy is found in Jesus. We know that he is the Prince of Peace. He's the one who comes to bring rest, right? And so whatever struggle, that's the idea. Whatever struggle you're going through in life, whatever problems that have come your way, they're just an effect of the world that is chosen to live under someone else as Lord. And maybe it's an effect of you yourself choosing to live under somebody else as Lord. But if you want peace, there's a promise here. What is it? Jesus is the Prince of Peace, right? That's how you find peace. But many people will try to find peace in other ways. And now the teacher's moving on to a subject that he's going to spend 2 chapters talking about. And that's going to be wealth and desires. And it's not at all unrelated with this, because it's usually going after wealth that causes so many injustices in our world, right? The desire to have more and more and more. And so that's going to bring me to my first point, and I've got a lot to cover. I'm going to have 5 points tonight, and we're going to get through them all. My first point is that wealth can't satisfy. Wealth can't satisfy. See, some people may think, if I could just be happy in life, if I could just have wealth, right? You've ever had that prayer, like, Lord, just get me out of this. I just want $100 million. Like, that would be fine, right? Whatever problem. If I could just have, like, one of the effects, me and my wife been doing the Nevada Day treasure hunt. As it got closer to the end, I began to think, Lord, if I could just find that $1,000, this would be great, right? But the truth is, that's not going to satisfy me. Look at what verse 10 says in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. It says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless, right? Notice it's the love of money that is the problem, not money itself, right? And this isn't the first time this comes up in Scripture. Like, the writer, the teacher, is not saying it's bad to have money. He's saying it's bad to love it. And why? Because when you love something, that becomes the main priority in your life, right? Like, especially those new types of love. It consumes all your time, your thoughts, loving something consumes you. And so you're definitely not supposed to love money because it's consuming, but it can never satisfy, right? The person who loves money won't have enough, and the one who loves wealth is never satisfied by their income. I heard a quote by Rockefeller, who was, I think it was John Rockefeller, but now I might have messed that up. But he was one of the wealthier people in American history, and he was asked, how much money is enough? And he said, just $1 more. Now here's the problem. There's always $1 more out there, right? So if you think that if all I need in life is just to have money, to have wealth, you're never going to be satisfied in life because you just need $1 more. And then there's always more dollars. You're just continuing to go after more and more and more, and it'll never satisfy you. The other problem with wealth is that it begins to consume you. Look at verse 11. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? See, this is like if you want to go back to the time this was written, this is like a farmer who wants to increase his wealth, so he buys another farm, but in buying another farm, he has more workers. And so as his assets increase, so does everybody who's asking something out of him. And before he knows it, he's living for them and not for God, or he's more focused on them, and he's never able to enjoy what he has. See, I think God wants us to have joy in our life. But if you're consumed with wealth, and if you're trying to get more and more, it steals your joy. It doesn't give you more. And by the way, increase doesn't simply have to be about wealth increase, right? You can have social capital, right? Now, the more people that know you, the more people want from you. And that's not going to bring any happiness either. It also steals your sleep. Look at verse 12. The sleep of the laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. See, if you pursue your life going after more wealth, more money, it keeps you up at night. And I want to emphasize that the teacher's talking about wealth, but it's really just going after anything besides God, right? It's really pursuing anything in life that won't ultimately satisfy. Wealth is just the main topic of tonight. But anything you put that you love more than God becomes an idol that will never satisfy, an idol that will consume you, an idol that will steal your sleep. And we've spent far too many sleepless nights worried about the problems of the world, haven't we? And what we want is sleep. The sleep of the laborer, that is sweet, kind of like honey. I suppose. And why is it sweet? Why is it's sweet? Because it's honest. It didn't chase after something it wasn't supposed to have. It's honest. Where the one who goes after wealth is wrestling in night, wondering how he can get more or how she can get more. That's not the kind of life that satisfies. The kind of life that satisfies is not found in anything that's under the sun. It's found in something that's under the sun, S-O-N, Jesus. You want a life that satisfies? Pursue Jesus. My second point is that wealth harms its owner. So not only will it not satisfy, it also is going to harm the one that goes after it. So here's what it says in verse 13. He says, I have seen a grievous evil under the sun. So remember his perspective. These are physical things. I've seen a grievous evil under the sun. Wealth that is hoarded for the harm of its owner, and wealth lost by some misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. Right? And notice that the writer doesn't use any kind of specific ideas. It's just, I've noticed that wealth is hoarded is actually harmful. And he doesn't tell us anything about the person that he's thinking about. But my mind goes automatically to the person of Job. Do you know him? Job is somebody who was wealthy. He was blessed. God had given him, surrounded him with a shrub of protection, and his life was blessed. He had lots of children, flocks and herds, and God decided that it was okay for that to be taken away from him. And so, just like that, overnight, raiders came in and took over his farm and stole his livestock. A fire came and it killed his sheep as they grazed in the land. And a mighty wind came and it blew his house down, and all his children were inside. See, those are all things that are valuable, but they do not make up life. They are not what life is ultimately about. Your possessions, your family, whatever it is, those things are incredibly important, but they're not what life is ultimately about. And Job, he's definitely heartbroken. He rips his garments and he falls down before God. But I want to read what he says because I think it sums up why Job is able to make it through his tragic life. Verse 20 of chapter 1 of Job says this, At this Job got up and he tore his robes and he shaved his head, and then he fell to the ground in worship. What a weird thing. He had lost everything. And he shows these obvious signs of mourning. But he falls to the ground in worship. And this is what he says. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Isn't that amazing? He realized that his life was not made up of all the things that surrounded his life. They were all important to him. That's why he fell down and tore his clothes and he mourned. It would have been incredibly difficult for him to lose his children. But he realized that God is worthy to be worshiped, not for what he can give you, but because of who he is. And God is mighty and magnificent. I don't know what is going on in each other's lives. I don't know the things that make you want to tear your clothes and fall down and mourn. But I do know that whatever it is, whatever you're going through, God is still worthy to be worshiped. And I think that's important. It's important to Job, and it's important to the writer of Ecclesiastes. He realizes that he can't take anything with him. He says that in verse 15 of chapter 5, everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing with them for their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain, since they toil for the wind? And all their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. See, toiling for the wind, that's running after things in life that you can't catch. And the things in life that you can't catch is all those things that you believe will make you happy. Whether it's wealth, whether it's relationships, whatever it is that you think might make you happy, you're just chasing wind. And happiness exists, but it's not found in those things. It's not found. In fact, I think true happiness might be found in contentment, and Timothy has something to say about that. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, here's what he says: "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from their faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." And again, I really think money is just a placeholder here. I don't care what it is that you're chasing after under the sun. Happiness, joy, contentment, meaning, value only come from above the sun. A God that transcends the physical things in life. That's what makes us find value and meaning in this life. I think that's my third point, by the way. Joy in life is a gift from God. And again, as we've gone through Ecclesiastes, we find these different sections. They're like, the entire book is pessimistic. That's why I think one of the key ideas of understanding how to read Scripture is to read it in community. Because everybody I've talked to so far about Ecclesiastes has said, I tried to read it once and I gave it up 2 chapters in. Like it was just such a hard book, right? That's because the Bible was always meant to be read in community and studied in community, because this is a book that's super pessimistic, and if we don't understand it, it's hard to grasp like the wind. But there are these passages in Ecclesiastes that are optimistic. They're seizing the day. They're helping us to see that there is something in life that brings us joy, right? Let's look at verse 18. It says, "This is what I have observed to be good, that it's appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life that God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and his possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and to be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart." Where do we find happiness? In Jesus. Where do we find happiness? This is a gift from God. And that's why when you look at the world, you see oppression and you see justice denied and you see all of these things, because you have people who are serving a king that is not truly their king. They're running after things that will not satisfy them. But you can have all of those things. Notice it talks about all of those things. It talks about having food. See, I think God wanted us to enjoy the fruits of the land. God certainly does. We're not supposed to love money and wealth, but he's not advocating here that we live like these lifestyles where we don't permit ourselves any pleasures. No, what he's saying is that you can find satisfaction in these things if you realize that these things themselves are a gift from God. You are not the person that provides your own happiness, that provides your own meaning. In fact, throughout Israel's history, they like to eat, which is true for us too, right? We like to eat. In fact, one of my favorite things that we did today, a potluck, right? We like to eat, but eating by itself is vanity. It's nothing. It's meaningless. When the Israelites ate, they ate to celebrate God. They ate to celebrate the Passover, to remember how God redeemed them from Egypt. They ate Pentecost, the Feast of Pentecost, to remember the harvest, and later on it became associated with Mount Sinai and the giving of the law. They had the Feast of Tabernacles to remember that God dwelled with them in the desert and he provided for them as they were there. See, they didn't eat just because food is good, and it is good, right? But no matter what you eat, it will never satisfy unless you realize God is at its source. See, there's a verse in Deuteronomy we should probably read. Deuteronomy chapter 12, I think. Actually, it's chapter 8, verse 14. It says this. Nope, I'm going to go to chapter 12 first. I got my tabs a little messed up. Chapter 12, verse 7. It's talking about a feast, and look at what it says. It says, there, in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your families shall eat, and you shall rejoice in everything you have put your hand to, because the Lord your God has blessed you. You notice how the feast is not about the food? It's not. The feast is about God who provided the food. How different would our life be if we realized that who we are, the happiness that we have, the joys in life come from God and not from your own labor? Because if you believe that you can do it for yourself, if that's what you believe, you can make and create your own happiness, you end up making and creating a mess. It's true. There's people who are living in messes all around us. Why? Because they're making and creating what they believe will make them happy. Happiness doesn't come from you. Happiness, joy, is a gift from God. In fact, somebody could have everything their heart desires and still not be happy. Have you seen those people? When you go out under the sun into the world, have you seen the people that have it all and still aren't happy? Here they are in chapter 6, verse 1 of Ecclesiastes. It says, I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, honor, so that they lack nothing their heart desires. But God doesn't grant them the ability to enjoy it, and strangers enjoy them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. And there we are. You could have it all in life, and you're not satisfied with it because it doesn't come from you. Happiness, joy itself, it comes from above the sun. It's sourced in God. So maybe, if we're following this, maybe the point is we should stop pursuing happiness as if we can achieve it through worldly ways. Maybe we should understand that real happiness, real joy, if you want to have a life that has value that transcends the physical itself, then you have to pursue the God who can give it to you. You have to love him more than whatever else. I'm going to skip my fourth point because I want to get through chapter 6. And I want to look at my fifth point, which is the appetite never satisfies. This is in verse 7 of chapter 6. And listen to what he says. He says, everyone's toil is for their mouth, yet their appetite is never satisfied. That just like, if you're looking for somebody who's like a object lesson for that point, right here, right? I can eat and eat and eat, and then an hour later, I'm hungry again, right? And that's life. I mean, you guys live it too. You have breakfast only to need lunch. It's a cycle of sameness that just continues to happen. Why? Because our senses, right? And we could, like, food is just what he's talking about. Like, if you live for your mouth, that's just what he's talking about. But he's talking about sensual pleasures, right? The things we see, the things we taste, the things we touch. Our sensual pleasures. If you're living for those things, if you're living for those things, You'll always need more. Like food. You'll always need more food. You'll eat, but then you'll be hungry again. Right? Because those things cannot bring satisfaction. In fact, what can bring satisfaction? Jesus. What can bring satisfaction? Look at verse 9. It says, better what the eyes see than the roving appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing of the wind. He's telling us, be happy with what's in front of you. Be happy with what's in front of you. I think time's passing me by. And we have a new song we want to do tonight. But I want to end on this. If you look at chapter 5 and 6, the point is clear. You cannot be happy going after the things of the world. They will leave you completely unsatisfied. They will leave you wanting more. They will keep you up at night. Joy comes from above the sun. And we're challenged here to make Christ king. Because when we make the world king, we see oppression. We see people's rights denied. But when we make Christ king, well, he's the Prince of Peace. And so if you want to have a life that is satisfying, if you want to have a life that has meaning, that transcends the physical, you find it in Jesus. Anywhere else you look is going to keep you wanting and keep you continuing to have to go after more and more and more, and there's no rest in that. We want rest. We find that in Jesus, who is our rest.